Welcome to another episode of Talkin' Smack with Bob and Jack, episode number 10 now. Jack, we're into double digits. We must be doing something right. We got to double digits. That's something.
Yeah, it is, man. It's more than the Browns traditionally put on the scoreboard. So we're in good shape there.
Yeah, and usually about 2-3 more wins than they're good for a season too. We are at number 10, and that is something. There's something to be said for that. I'll be a lot more excited when we are at episode 100 and when we get into the triples. But here we are. It's a big week. It's an important week. We have been spending a lot of time. By the way, Bob France, and you can see where to follow me on online, France on Air. You know what? We got to fix that too. I changed my handle on Twitter. It's the same thing. You look for me there under Always Right Radio, but I changed the handle to France Rants. Also on Truth Social, you see Jack Socials up there too. Make sure you follow us as well. Jack, we spent a lot of time on our last episode, and I've been spending a lot of time on the radio, and you've been spending a lot of time writing for the Ohio Press Network on what's going on in this lame duck session of the Ohio General Assembly. And they're trying to get a lot of very important things done, some of them positive, some of them not so much. Now, you and I spent a great deal of time on Monday. We talked with Andrew Brenner, State Senator Andrew Brenner, about House Bill 178 Senate bill that passed the Senate, was working its way through the House committee. He's pushing for it. Matt Huffman is pushing for it. Mike DeWine is pushing for it. So what we need out of you right now, because you're covering this better than anybody else in Ohio as far as I'm concerned, where is it? Did they combine other bills with it? Is Mike DeWine going to have a line item veto over this? Here's what we're talking about for those who missed it. 178. Senate Bill 178 essentially strips all of the powers from the Ohio Board of Education when it comes to policies, platform, and curricula, and gives it to a cabinet-level, non-elected, appointed by the governor position who would be in charge of the DEW, or Department of Educational Workforce. So 178 may or may not have had enough votes to pass on its own. So, Jack, you've been following this, like I said, better than anybody in Ohio as far as I'm concerned, about what they did to sweeten the pot to get more conservatives to vote for this on the House side of the General Assembly. What do you got?
Yeah, so there were a couple of bills that were added, I believe in their entirety, as amendments to it's now Senate Sub-Bill 178, which aims to create the Department of Education and Workforce and do exactly what you just explained. Three bills, that have been added. Representative Scott Lips has two bills. One of them deals with prohibiting discrimination at colleges and universities in the state of Ohio. The other one deals with eliminating discrimination with primary education in the state of Ohio. So you think about elementary school, middle school, high school, and then even some preschools that are chartered or by the state of Ohio and then receive federal funding. Discrimination would be prohibited there. So basically all Ohio schools.
What does that mean,
discrimination for, yes, good question. COVID-19 discrimination is what we will call it under the broad umbrella. So you can't prohibit a student from doing something that doesn't have a jab that you permit a student that has a jab from doing. Also, with respect to what we would call those immunity certificates, the cards that say, "Hey, I've been vaxxed," you cannot prohibit or discriminate against students who don't have those. So those two pieces of legislation were amended into Senate Sub-Bill 178. I believe that Fowler Arthur, state representative, also had a bill that contained language regarding homeschooling and to protect homeschooling. That was added in, although those three have been added as, quote, sweeteners. I'm not sure that the General Assembly has the 50 votes that would be needed in order to pass that bill. Now, I talked with lawmakers on the way here to this podcast, and one of them, it's State Representative Chris Jordan, said he doesn't think that they're going to have the votes, that they're likely not going to have the 50 votes. There are 10 to 12 Republicans who are no, or in his words, hell no, on the bill. The other challenge that they're going to have, there are a lot of people absent. I think Scott Wiggum, who is a Republican from the Worcester area, he's out of town. Nino Vitale is out of town. There is another state representative who has resigned and moved on to another job. And my understanding is that there are a lot of Democrats in the General Assembly who are also missing in the House. So I do believe that it will go to the floor tonight. I talked with State Senator Andrew Brenner, who we had on the show earlier in the week on Monday. And he told me, surprise, there's in the atrium of the State House, there are tables set up for a formal dinner that apparently Bob Cupp has initiated. So everybody's going to eat. And then they might get back to business later tonight. Brenner said it looks like a really long night. And I asked him about 178. He said he was still uncertain. He's not sure if they have the votes or they don't have the votes. I asked about the bill that we talked about earlier, and maybe I'll save that for later, but voter ID bills. But right now, Senate Sub Bill 178 does have amendments. It does not, though, according to Brenner, have appropriations. Now, that's important because if there are appropriations in that bill, that would give Governor Mike DeWine, if the bill passes, the ability to line item veto anything in that bill. So if there are conservative things in that bill that you would like, but the governor may not like, the government can nix those. Told that there are no appropriations in the bill, so the governor would have to swallow that bill whole if it does pass.
I was told by somebody that there were, but they were not confirmed on that. They were saying this is what they had been told, that there was at least a chance of some appropriations being in the bill that would give him that line item veto. Let me say this in response before we get into the weeds on this. What a crock that General Assembly members, our legislators, are absent. I cannot ever understand that. You have been elected to serve the people. It's not an easy job. You know that when you're running for it. You know it's going to cost you family time. You know that when you'd like to take a vacation around the holidays like some other people would from their regular jobs, you kind of can't if your committee chair calls you to serve. If your Speaker in the House or the Senate President calls you and says, we got a lot of important work to do. We got things to discuss. We got bills to vote on. We got laws to decide. You ought to be there. And if you're not there, you better be on a deathbed or something. I don't like this. I don't like the fact that there are some, and by the way, some of the names you just mentioned, the Republicans, are guys I like. So I'm not trying to beat up on anybody just, for the sake of it, and I'm certainly not beating up on people that I like. But this is crap. This is important stuff that's going to impact the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. And as it pertains to 178, the way schools are run from the state level, and they're not showing up, what does that mean? What does that even mean? How do you get it? You don't get it. You don't get to just take a free day. Like I said, unless it's a sick day and a legitimate reason, a legitimate cause, get your ass to the State House and cast votes that matter. I cannot underscore that enough. It drives me nuts.
Let me punctuate that point, if I may.
Yeah.
So oftentimes when I pick Eva Grace up from school and we're commuting, we'll work on flashcards, schoolwork. We'll talk about her day. But some days I take a lot of phone calls. And today was just fortuitous that this happened. I was making and taking several phone calls on the way home. And in between calls, I looked at her and I said, I missed you, sweetheart. It's good to have you home. And you know what she said to me? Then why don't you talk to me? And that was a dagger in the heart. And now, don't get me wrong, I talk to my daughter a lot. But in that moment, what she was saying is, hey, I want to be your priority. That's the point. You either make this job a priority or you don't. You chose something else over it. And that's I guess, your prerogative. But there are points in time when your job should be your priority. And this should be one of those times. Absolutely. I do like, by the way, what Chris Jordan said. He said, I realize we have a lot of problems with our education system at the state level. He said, but I really have a hard time trusting one guy who locked our kids out of school for a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, trusting one guy to pick the person who's going to run the show for your kids, just like he picked the person who locked everybody out of schools. It was Amy Acton who made those decisions. He put it all in her hands. He put it all in the little front pockets of her little lab coat, which I will never, ever, ever stop making fun of. Amy Acton, when she was doing all of those updates in front of the TV cameras, Jack, when you were grilling her and them, so freaking ridiculous. She did not just come from a lab. She doesn't work in a lab anymore. She did not come from seeing patients. She doesn't work in an office anymore. She did not come from just doing great research at a clinic. She doesn't do that anymore. But every time she came to the podium, She's wearing a lab coat that says, see, I'm a doctor. See, it says here, I'm a doctor. Trust me, I'm a doctor. It was so embarrassing. Fauci didn't wear lab coats. Deborah Birx didn't wear lab coats. None of the others. Dr. Redfield didn't wear a lab coat. And when the critics of the COVID policy, Dr. Malone didn't wear a lab coat. Dr. McCullough didn't wear a lab coat. She was so embarrassing as a leader of the health department of this state. Just said, look, everybody, look, really, I swear, I might not talk like one, but I swear I'm a doctor. See, it says so right here. She might as well have worn her diploma on a lanyard around her neck, too, just to prove it. She was such an embarrassment.
Bob, I may have said this to you before, but when I was growing up, and if I were on a date with somebody, and that girl looked at me and said, "Hey, I'm a faithful person," I would run. Because if anyone had to tell me in the first
got to announce it.
that
Yep.
if you've got to announce it, you're probably not that. And every time I saw her in that lab coat, I thought the same thing. If you have to try to prove to us and yourself that you're legitimate, you probably aren't.
Exactly correct. She was an abortionist, by the way. That's the job that she did, and she stopped doing that a long time ago too. Anyway, back to the point here about 178 and these other add-ons. I'm again going to say I cannot stand the legislative process if that's what it takes. Listen to me clearly, Ohio Republican legislators. And that means the massive majority of you that there are in the House and the majority that there are in the Senate. If you can't write a bill that gets support on its own, that you have to add 3 different bills as sweeteners in it in order to get enough, because people do like the idea of not discriminating against college kids who might not have the poison dart, and high school kids and primary grade school kids. I like those bills, but those bills ought to be good enough to stand on their own anyway. You don't need to add them to this 178 to make people swallow 178. The poison dart bill for kids in college has nothing to do with education in Ohio and creating the Department of Education and Workforce and the cabinet level position. Having school kids take the dart. No, it has absolutely nothing to do. You're weak, you're feckless, you're ridiculous, you're embarrassing. You're the reason we have had such little progress with a massive red majority in this state compared to other states that have massive red legislatures. You are awful at your jobs. And I want you to hear that very directly. And I don't care if that costs me interviews with you on my radio program or on this podcast. You're awful. It's why I hope there are some changes when the next General Assembly begins in January, because you're going out the way you operated in this one, which is just horribly. Having said that, Jack, you and I both kind of said we're up in the air on Monday about Bill 178. We
Right.
don't like the job that the Ohio Board of Education has done. We don't like the makeup of that board, which is very, very far left and woke, which I think puts our kids in jeopardy, and I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have. So, knowing that, a lot of people feel the same way. They said, fine, let's strip the board of those powers and give it to this, this DEW unelected appointed position. We were both up in the air about it. I have come down out of the air. I have gotten off of the fence. And I'm on the side now. No disrespect to Annie Brenner, who came on with us and tried to really sell this thing. But I think they can take 178 and shove it straight up their noses, because I don't like that idea at all. I don't want to give Mike DeWine that kind of consolidated power. Do you? Are you still up in the air, or are you coming down?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, but that's what
Damn
we
right.
do here. I'm an external processor, so let me talk through it a little bit. I think one of the challenges I have is that this Department of Education and Workforce is another department under the executive branch, right? So to me, what we're saying is, and let's just, by the way, let's just go back, and I'm going to read a text here in a minute because it applies, but let's look at some of the bills that have been in the House. We talked about Save Women's Sports, right, which would bar biological males from competing against biological females. We have Gary Click's SAFE Act, which would have prohibited gender transition with minors. We've had let's talk about the medical freedom part of it, because I think it applies, because Scott Lipp's bills have been put into 178 now. We had House Bill 248, and one of the things that the left and opponents that they'll say is, well, look at all this support that we had, or opposition to the bill. I don't remember there ever being as much support for a House bill than there was for 248. So remind me, Bob, I want to read you a text I got from Scott Lips last night, but I don't want to go off base here. So, I struggle because as a legislature, you had an opportunity for over 2 years to craft and pass meaningful legislation. And by the way, you don't control the state house 50 to 49. You control the state house by a supermajority in both the upper and lower chamber, and you have a Republican governor. So, no, I'm sorry. Mike DeWine is a Republican in name only. He does not govern like a Republican. He governs like a progressive. That's who he is. So I'm going to, on this podcast going forward, it's going to be Mike the Progressive, not Mike DeWine the Republican. So, but the state legislatures,
you can just call him Little Napoleon or Mike the Weasel or Mike No Spine or any of those things. But I haven't copywritten those yet, so you can go ahead and use those.
Touche. Thank you very much. So Mike the Progressive did nothing to jockey any of those pieces of legislation through the state house.
No.
But how many times did he get on the horn and talk to people around the state of Ohio when it entailed schools making sure that kids wore masks, which, by the way, did they not only not work, they caused health issues.
Yes, they did.
He created a vaccine lottery for a group of people that do not need the vaccine by and large. There are outliers in everything, but he incented people with taxpayer dollars to take the jab. So if Mike DeWine wanted to get something done, he could have got something done. And if the state legislature wanted to get something done, they could have lobbied DeWine. They didn't do it. So part of me feels like because the state legislature is so inept, and by the way, that is our most direct form of democracy, is it not?
That's exactly right. That's why it was so important to for the Supreme Court's decision on Dobbs. It did not eliminate Roe versus Wade. It sent Roe versus Wade back to our legislators who hear directly from us. And we can decide at the state level what we want to do on things like that, on abortion. So yes, this is directly the most impact we have on government is our state representation.
So I'm long around the barn here, but I'm really pissed off at our state legislature. I'm angry that they did not use the opportunity that they've had to create meaningful change through law. Okay, so what they're doing is now they're going to hand it over to Daddy DeWine. We've seen this movie before. I've talked about it, but look, we have a huge problem in our state government. It is lobbyists who essentially buy their way through and water down legislation. We have a governor who loves to overreach, and we are now going to put the power of decision making with respect to educating our kids in the hands of a bureaucrat under the control of a governor who had no problem ignoring the science, who had no problem ignoring the data, who had no problem appointing. Amy Acton was an abortionist. The woman he tried to appoint after her was an abortionist. Thank God that the Senate stepped up at that point and said, no good. He appointed Sam Randazzo despite getting a memo that said, hey, this is going down the wrong road here. I don't trust Mike DeWine. I do not trust Mike DeWine to make the right decision. I don't trust, as a result, Senate Bill 178. I will take my chances with the Ohio people coming to grips with reality and making the right choices. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the State Board of Education needs to be revamped. Chris Jordan talked about it with me tonight. He said what we really should do is make sure that everybody on that board is elected, and they're all elected from districts that we apportion through the State House. But I would rather deal with that monstrosity of a mess than to have to deal with somebody that a dictator appoints that we know. Look at Cleveland State University and the people he appointed there. Yeah. They voted unanimously to take John Marshall's name off the law school. Mike DeWine does not have a history of appointing conservatives. I don't like 178. It took me 20 minutes to say it. I would not support it.
Yeah, it did, but it's fine because, explain it the way you need to. And by the way, this is off the topic. We need to get on the topic maybe next episode 11, Jack. He also gets to appoint the next Supreme Court justice, and he says he's going to do that before the end of this year. So I'm terrified of that. I'm as terrified of that as I am as to who he would choose in this, if 178 passed, in this unelected DEW chair position or chief position. So he's got a lot of appointments to make. Now let's get to some positive news. And one of the reasons why I came down off of that fence about 178 is because of what happened yesterday. Actually happened, I'll just say this week because we're recording this podcast. And that is something that should have happened back in September when it was first introduced. And that is the Shea resolution passed. Now, for those who are just kind of tuning into this and maybe you're just kind of really getting your feet wet with Ohio politics and some of this stuff, just a reminder, the Shea resolution, it was written as an attempt to encourage the Board of Education, this is by board member Brendan Shea, to demand that the superintendent of schools in the state of Ohio send a letter to all Ohio school districts, not only the district superintendents, but also every board member, as well as teachers and administrators, that says we will not be joining the federal government's new guidelines on Title IX. Title IX has protected girls in sports and giving them opportunities for 50 years. And to erase girlhood, to erase the feminine gender by saying boys who want to be a part of that can just feel free to come right on in to the girls' bathrooms, to the girls' changing rooms, the locker rooms where girls get naked and change from their gym clothes, their uniforms, and so on and so forth to their regular clothes. And yes, believe it or not, showers. Biological boys, as long as you say you're a girl, put on enough makeup and come on in. Moreover, and perhaps worse, coming onto the girls' teams. And we have seen example after example after example of this. Boys saying they're girls, dominating girls' sports, knocking them down the peg of achievement, which costs them scholarship opportunities. It's just so wrong for a million different reasons. Well, the Biden administration, of course, wants to expand and change Title IX to allow all of that to happen. Ohio, this resolution by Brendan Shea says, no, we're not going to be doing that. This is the guidance from the state of Ohio. The Attorney General Yost of the state of Ohio led a bunch of other AGs and also sending a letter to the Biden administration and to Miguel Cardona, Education, saying, no, we're not doing this and you can't do this. We'll take legal action. Bottom line is, and I know I'm doing what you just said, Jack, I'm running long around the barn or however you phrase that. The bottom line is that the Shea resolution got kicked from September to October, from October to November, and finally here in December, they had a vote on it, and it passed. 10 votes to 7 votes to 1 vote in abstention. And Jack, the one key to this is they took out the preamble of the resolution, which basically detailed all of the biological realities that need to be understood so that you can understand why the rest of the resolution was written, that there are differences between boys and girls, males and females. It's not about how I feel, and it's not about how long I wear my hair or whether I wear slacks or a dress. It's about chromosomes, it's about anatomy, it's about physiology, and it's about biology. And all of that was created or was written into the preamble. And as part of the agreement to get 10 votes to pass it against 7 votes to defeat it, and again, that one abstention was to get rid of the preamble. Brendan Shea told me on the radio this morning he got 90% of what he wanted in that bill. It's a good bill, or it's a good resolution, and it will indeed compel the state superintendent to send that letter to every district in Ohio. So there's a lot of really good with this. It's not perfect, but a lot of really good with this. And circling it back now to the 178, because we've seen, at least in this instance, the ability for the board to get something done the right way. I am not ready to strip that board of its power and hand all of it to one, education version of Amy Acton appointed by Mike DeWine.
Well, a couple of things. I want to read to you, and this is going a little bit off the path, but I think it's important. Just a couple of key elements of that preamble. The context of education rests on the understanding that there are objective facts and absolute truths. Sex is not arbitrarily assigned at birth, and denying the reality of biological sex destroys the foundational truths upon which education rests. I think those are important points, but as you mentioned, those were carved out. And the resolution did pass 10 to 7 to 1. And one of the things that I want to point out, actually, I'm going to do this. Not sorry. Manchester voted no. Fessler voted yes. Hill voted yes. Kilgore voted yes. Shea, yes. Miranda, no. Collins, no. Newman, no. Hagan, yes. Miller, no. Johnson, no. La Mancha, abstained. Toll, yes. LaRue, yes. Davis, yes. Kern, wasn't there. Hackett, yes. And Bedell, no. All of that to say this. 4
Did you say McGuire? No. Did I miss McGuire?
I thought I said McGuire.
I was listening for it. Maybe
McGuire's a yes. McGuire was a yes.
Okay, because I was going to say that was part of the negotiation. She was the one, according to what Brendan told me, who insisted on the preamble being booted before she would vote yes. So she did follow through and vote yes. Continue.
Yes. So 4 of the 7 no votes or abstentions are DeWine appointments. So that's concerning. So when we talk about 178 in appointments, particularly, we can talk about Amy Acton, we can talk about Cleveland State University and the woke culture there, but this directly relates to education, right? And by the way, rumor has it that La Mancha, who abstained, is likely going to be somebody that DeWine pushes to be reappointed. Mike Toll, who voted yes on the amendment, actually does not have the governor's support.
No.
But what I will also tell you is that insiders at the Senate level told me that it's not on the agenda today to talk about Mike DeWine's appointments to the State Board of Education, and they'll probably be held over until the next General Assembly. And the Senate is going to work to come up with names to either replace or add to those that DeWine has put forth to be added to the State Board of Education.
Yeah, and that's fine. We don't have to talk about it now. We talked about it enough on episode 9, I think, in which we talked about Mike Toll and what a joke it is. Brendan Chase said Mike Toll should be in line for the presidency of the board. He ought to be in charge of the board. He's that good. He's that committed. He's not a rabble-rousing conservative. He's not the guy who's going to go up and jump up and down on a chair. He's just steady and strong and has what's in the kids' best interest in mind, and that's what it's supposed to be. The idea that Mike DeWine would pick the liberals who oppose the support of Title IX, or in other words, to flip that around, to pick the liberals who support changing Title IX and allowing boys to come in and impact and infiltrate girls' spaces and sports, and then to boot Mike Toll, to not give him a reappointment, is just beyond frustrating. It's beyond infuriating, to be honest with you. As is something else, Jack, you and I talked about before we started the podcast. There's one member of that board that was crying and complaining about if we don't do whatever we can to protect certain members of the student body and student population, they're going to be in danger or some other crap. Can you remind me of what that was so that I can remind everybody that it's crap?
Yes. Let me make sure I get her name right. It's Christina Collins from Medina. She represents District 7. But she said basically she could not support the resolution because it targeted one vulnerable group of kids and it would put them at risk. And I don't know if I shared this with you earlier, but State Representative Skindell really kind of echoed those comments today in an article that one of our syndication partners wrote, saying that all we're doing with this resolution is putting transgender kids at risk, and he's going to stand up against it and create some legislation to oppose it. But Christina Collins, Medina, District 7, you want my honest opinion? She has absolutely no business being on the State Board of Education. She has absolutely no business providing input to kids. When you tell me that it's an extreme position to try to protect my daughter, from believing in fact, making sure that she believes in biological and scientific fact, and number 2, that she follows her own intuition. I mean, at 9 years old, she realizes that if a girl walks over to her and says she's a boy, that's that girl's issues, and that she should not be forced to comply or participate in that little girl's issues. So when you have somebody like Collins who tries to take away the God-given, innate, intuitive ability of a child and call people who want to protect truth and reality, when you start singling those people out and say that if you really believe that, you're going to hurt these other kids without providing any reasonable, rational, or realistic reason as to why in the hell you'd say that, she has no business being on the board. And I pray that at some point the people in Medina County wake up, figure that out, and vote her ass off the board.
Very well said. Totally agree. And I'll add to that, by the way, it's not just the kids. It makes teachers and staff members and faculty members do the same thing. Participate in and affirm somebody's delusion, somebody's personality disorder or personality traits, because I will again submit to you, scientifically and statistically, the number of people who actually suffer from gender dysphoria, where they really truly have a mental issue that says my body isn't right, I'm actually a boy or girl on the opposite side, The number of people who suffer from that is so tiny and so minuscule, it can't even be measured, for crying out loud, in the population of 330 million Americans. It is growing by massive leaps and bounds because it's not gender dysphoria, it is attention seeking. There are so many people, so many kids who are seeking attention because they are being pushed, groomed, coerced, and so forth by people like some of the teachers, by people like some of the people that you just mentioned, including Collins on that board, by influencers on social media, by influencers on the internet, by influencers on TV, and in the world of celebrity and music. They're being pushed into something that is simply not, that's not gender dysphoria. That's called peer freaking pressure. And a lot of them feel that, and they get that, and so they identify themselves as something that's going to get them likes and clicks. So here's what I want to say. I'm tired of people like this board member Collins. I'm tired of them equating protecting the majority of children with targeting the minority of children. The two things are not mutually identical. One does not stack the other. If you pass a resolution like Shay's resolution to say, we're going to let Title IX speak for itself. We're going to let Title IX protect girls the way it always has in 50 years and been responsible for countless numbers of opportunities they would not have had before Title IX. We're not going to let biological boys infiltrate into that world and screw this up for girls. We're going to protect the population, the student bodies, like we always have. That is not the same thing as we're going to target those who might be a little bit different. Not at all. In fact, if we did the opposite and allowed the little boys to play on the girls' teams, and when I say little boys, we talk about this on a primary level. There is a junior high level and high school level where sports get very competitive. And again, scholarships, college opportunities are on the line. If we say we are going to allow that, we won't be protecting the quote-unquote trans or non-binary or whatever personality they want to develop and they want to say that they're following for a while. And usually they are very, very short phases. But we're not protecting them. We are, by definition, then targeting actual girls, regular old, what they like to call cis, which is something I will not be a part of, but regular old, ordinary, biological girls, females, feminine, period. So for those who say that if we don't do more to welcome the trans and the non-binary and the off the LGBTQ chart reservation, one of the 97 or 197 other genders, if we don't do more to help them, we are thus targeting them and trying to harm them. Horse crap. What we are doing is making sure that regular kids don't get targeted, teachers don't get targeted, and threatened with expulsion or firing or suspension if they don't call somebody by a pronoun that doesn't work, a pronoun that doesn't fit grammatically from a singular to a plural pronoun, or if it just is a word that was made up. I'm watching videos every day, Jack, you are too, of people making up new pronouns every day with new letters at the beginning, and then they give you instructional videos on TikTok and Instagram reels on how to use those words, and I expect you to learn those when you address me or else you're offending me. Kiss my offensive ass. I'm tired, man. I am not going to play these games anymore. I'm not changing science for these kids. I'm not changing English grammatical rules for these kids, and it is not targeting the LGBTQ kids to say so. I am saying what is right, what is science, what is grammar, what is normal, and we're not going to change that and make all of the other kids suffer for the very, very tiny number of them that actually have gender dysphoria. And obviously they're talking more and more about those who don't have gender dysphoria, but have personality quirks that say, I'm now a she. And the next day, no, I'm a they. And then the next day, no, I'm a Z. No, the next day, I'm a they. Sorry, not playing. Go play in traffic. I don't want to say that. Go play on the monkey bars because I'm not playing your game with you.
Man, that's a hard one to follow, man. Yeah,
I'm done, man.
Well, I am too. And there's a time and there's a place for everything. And I think the thing that really alarms me the most, I'm going to go back to the Hilliard story that we wrote last week that, by the way, has caused a ton of uproar in Hilliard, and rightfully so, by the way. Shame on you, Hilliard City Schools, for not wanting to have public dialogue on a matter. Shame on you. But I'm going to reference the story again. So what happened in Hilliard, we already talked about this, so I'll give you the abridged version. Parents get called by the school and they're told that their daughter is suicidal. They're alarmed because they didn't realize that their daughter had any emotional distress. What they later find out is that she was exhibiting emotional distress at school to the point that the parents should have been contacted weeks in advance. She was also approached by 2 teachers who talked to her about her gender identity. All of that was kept from the parents. And I say all of that to say this. The parents were willing to have that conversation with their daughter. The parents rightfully believe that they should be in the position, the primary position, to have that discussion with their daughter, not called in after the fact when the government, the good old government, dropped the ball and mishandled the situation and created an environment where the daughter felt suicidal. This is my issue. If there is a certain segment of the population, which, you talk about the bell curve, right? Most of us are right there in the middle, and you have outliers all over the place. So of course there are going to be people who are transgender, who want to transition. It's a very small number, and what you're seeing right now is the result of political pressure and peer pressure because they want to pop this into society and now make it normal. But I digress. The whole issue is, if a student has that issue should be handled with the parent and the child, period. The school has no business talking to the child about their gender or about their sexuality. And certainly they have no business trying to pretend like you're not born with either male anatomy or female anatomy. Well, there are some people who are born with 2. Like I said, there are outliers on both sides of that curve. Overall, they're bastardizing science and they're replacing parents. That's the big issue here, is that we're teaching our kids to not rely on their own intuitive, God-given ability to understand and comprehend things. We're causing them to question themselves. And worse, we're causing them to question their parents. That's terrible. I can't think of anything more abusive, not for the transgender kids, for kids in general. So when I hear people like Christina Collins, and I hear this, by the way, who am I? Representative Skindell, who acted like a buffoon, pounding on the table while Jenna Powell was trying to get a piece of legislation introduced and passed in the House last year. By the way, I think he caused a couple $1,000s of damage to equipment in the State House, but I digress. I'm poking fun because I'm angry.
I need to see that. I didn't see that. I when you asked who am I right now, I was going to say John Fetterman, but you said it's Skindell, so I need to see that. I don't recall that.
Dan Bongino blew him up, man. I mean, he blew him up. Skindell acted like a total buffoon, actually like a baboon, grunting and groaning and pounding on the table. My understanding is, this is speculation, I haven't confirmed it, so Mr. Skindell, you can call me and prove me wrong on this or tell me that I'm right. But apparently he caused $1,000 or more of damage to equipment in the State House, which, by the way, that never got punished. Should have. But anyway, I have a problem with people like Skindell and Collins telling me that when I live in sane land, where I think that if your child has gender dysphoria, that your child should take that up with you, and that you should be in the primary position, and that I should be in the primary position with my child, and that the school ought to teach reading, writing, math, and science, and punt on all of the other social issues. You're doing a disservice to sanity, and you really piss me off. I have a real hard time with it, Bob. And I hope and I pray that this is kind of like, remember 1999? Remember what was going to happen in 2000? The computers were going to go wacky. We were going to lose our money. The world was going to end. That's how this feels, right? Like if we don't make these changes in law, if we don't make these changes in our education system, kids are just going to, implode. That's not reality. And I hope that we can pump the brakes on this. I hope that we can take a step back and be realistic about what the risk is, who the risk is to, and how to best handle it. I can tell you, it's not handling it the way that it was handled in Hilliard, when parents are left out in the dark and a kid is so confused that she's suicidal.
Okay. Great follow-up on the Hilliard story. I'm glad you told it again. Let me offer this one. Hold my beer while I tell you about Massillon. Massillon Jackson Memorial Middle School. A middle school teacher there has now filed a lawsuit against the school district because she was forced to resign after refusing to refer to students by those preferred pronouns that I was just talking about. Lawsuit was filed in federal court. by Alliance Defending Freedom on behalf of teacher Vivian Garrity. She said her school district required teachers to participate in the social transition of students in her class who have, quote, transitioned to a gender that is inconsistent with their sex. Jack, I'm going to go off here again, and I don't want to, and I know nobody else wants to hear me go off about it. The idea that they have to create new policy for those wishing to transition, as if there has been, for decades and decades, just this massive, amount of people ready to burst at the seams, to declare that they're in the wrong body, that all of this gender dysphoria, millions of people have it. The idea that the schools now have to have training on how to socially transition those who are choosing to transition. This is flat out child abuse. Young boys who choose to exhibit some feminine traits are not girls, and who don't need to be transitioned and puberty blocked and ready for the knife either. Same thing for young girls who are tomboys. And the idea that they have this telling teachers to help them along in this process, rather than recognize these are young idiot kids being influenced oftentimes by other idiot kids, excuse me, is just so infuriating. So this teacher refused to talk with two different students by the preferred new names and pronouns that they had come up with. So she went to, according to the report, excuse me, I'm yelling myself into a coughing fit. My throat's all dry, and I told you I didn't want to go off again, but I'm protected. I'm very protective of kids, and I'm very, very sorry about that. It's weird. I mean, I used to follow my daughter around when she was 2 and playing on the playground. I would follow around with my hands underneath, so if she fell, I was catching. I'm going to protect kids.
Bob,
what?
Just get the shot. Just get the shot, man.
Don't
Just
do
get
it.
The booster.
Don't do it, Jack. Anyway, so she went to the principal and told her, I'm not really comfortable with this. I'm not going to do this. The principal told her she needed to set aside her, because she said this is based on her religion, her belief that, boys are boys, girls are girls, blah, blah, blah. She was told she has to put her beliefs aside as a public servant. So Alliance Defending Freedom Counsel Logan Spina said in a press release just yesterday, no official can force a teacher to set aside her religious beliefs in order to keep her job. The school tried to force her to recite as true the school's viewpoint on issues that go to the foundation of morality and human identity, like what makes us male or female, by ordering her to personally participate in the social transition of her students. The First Amendment prohibits that abuse of power. So they are filing the lawsuit on the grounds of violation of the 1st, the 14th, as well as the Civil Rights Act of 1871. And Jack, I don't want her to get her job back because I don't want to force her to go back into that environment. I want her to win hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and never have to teach again and deal with this kind of nonsense. Moreover, I want every other school district to see that and say, uh-oh, precedent has been set if we force teachers to play the stupid little reindeer games of calling kids by puppy names, calling kids by cat names, calling kids by made-up pronouns. It's going to cost us a hell of a lot of the taxpayer dollars we need to improve our schools. So it's going on, Jack. Hilliard, we talked about a different scenario in Lakota. This one is in Massillon. It's going on. And I'll tell you what, like I said, not on my damn watch. Not on my damn watch. I will go to the airwaves every day on the radio, and I'll come to you, with you, Jack, twice a week, and I'll influence as many people as I can to get to the school board meetings and stand up and oppose this crap from the beginning. It's got to be stopped.
Yeah, and this is the hill I'll die on too. I make no bones about that. There are people like me in the world who have children with another adult that they're no longer with, and the two parents can't come into agreement, right? Some people are like, well, if you don't like it, take your kid to private school, or take your kid to another school, take your kid to a charter school. Well, there are a lot of people in our country and in this state who don't have the ability to get along and come into agreement with a former spouse about how the kid's going to be educated, so the kid's educated in the public education system. And my single greatest job is being a papa to my daughter. And I believe that our greatest job as human beings is preparing the next generation. That's the legacy that we leave. So this is an important matter. I guess I echo everything that you said. And I just want to provide some insight, if I may, a little nugget of information that I don't know if our viewers and listeners are aware of, but there are a handful of law firms throughout the state of Ohio that advise these school districts on policy, practice, procedure, what's legal, what's illegal. And by the way, what schools wanted to know during the summer when Biden's administration made these Title IX changes, what do we have to do? What do we have to stop doing? And these law firms are really telling schools that based on, I believe one of the primary cases was, I call it Bostock. Some people say Bostock, but the Bostock case was a labor law case. It had to do with the hiring and firing of employees. It didn't have to do anything with schools and education. And in fact, the court in that case said this applies to this situation. It is not something that applies to other cases and scenarios. But interestingly, attorneys throughout the state of Ohio are sending legal advice to schools and saying, the Biden Title IX changes coupled with Supreme Court changes mean that you have to allow these things to go on in your school. And they're relying on faulty legal precedent, number one. And by the way, Dave Yost actually did write a letter, we've talked about it in the past, to this to U.S. Department of Education saying these Title IX changes are illegal. And that's a fact, Jack. These things are illegal. They're not going to stand the test of time. I believe that what's going to happen, by the way, with the Department of Agriculture rule and initiative to pull school funding from schools that don't comply with Title IX changes, that's not going to last. The Supreme Court already made a decision. I believe it was the EPA case, and they said when there's something that is so sweeping and has huge economic impact, you cannot make an administrative rule. Congress has to do their job, and they have to pass a law. So I think that's going to get struck down. And by the way, in Ohio alone, there were 500,000 kids who received assistance. And so, what they're doing is these law firms are going to schools and saying, hey, here's the Bostock case. By the way, it doesn't apply. And oh, by the way, if you don't comply, you're going to use Title IX funding. Here's my question to you, attorneys. Here's my question to you, superintendent. Name one time in the history of the United States when Title IX funding was withheld. Give me one case. Give me one example. And if you can't name one, then stop fear-mongering. This is the other problem, right? This is like politics 101. You have school systems now that are being politicked by attorneys. I'd love to know how teachers' unions are tied in with these law firms, by the way. But they're being lobbied and politicked by attorneys, and they're getting terrible legal advice. And so here we are. And so you have superintendents who have no clue what to do and school boards who are confused. Well, hopefully this all comes out in the wash in the next 6 to 12 months. And I pray that we get back to reading, writing, math, and science, boys competing against boys, girls competing against girls. But it's a hill I'll die on, and I'll fight for it.
Yeah, so will I, every single day of the week, and I will die on that hill too. And I don't care what anybody says. I'm not targeting anybody. And I'm also tired of hearing that on air and online criticism of the LGBTQ agenda, which we have been discussing here, is inciting violence. No, it's not. We are not inciting violence. We are not suggesting violence. We are not condoning violence. We are not promoting violence. We are doing the exact opposite. We're saying leave the kids alone. And if a little boy or a little girl wants to act a little bit weird or act a little bit like the other sex, I should say the other, because there's only two, ain't but two genders, understand that. If they want to act like that, fine. Do not make everybody else participate in it. That is not promoting violence or inciting violence. That is telling everybody to be left alone. Now, Jack, we only have about five or so minutes left, so I want to hit this real quick if you want to. Big deal this week. The Senate passed House Bill 485. Now, this matters because we saw 2020, and I don't know where everybody stands on it. I believe 2020 was just filled with fraud, from the universal mail-in balloting to the drop boxes to the same day voter registration, not requiring identification. I believe people got away with voting multiple times, getting drop boxes just stuffed full with people dropping off, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 different ballots at one location, then coming back later with more. Clearly, it's not theirs. So, and then, of course, we just had 2022, and there are still a lot of questions from last month in a place like Arizona and in a place like Georgia. So in Ohio, they just passed 485, changes photo ID requirements, saying you can no longer use a utility bill or something of that nature. You have to use an actual photo identification, Ohio driver's license, state identification. One caveat, it doesn't have to have your current address on it. that could lead to some problems if somebody kept an old ID and then got a new one with their updated address. They got two different names, or excuse me, two different IDs with two different addresses on it. They could technically go to two different precincts and vote, but it's still going to have their name on it. And then, of course, you're putting yourself in jeopardy of committing a crime if you are caught voting twice. But voter ID, and then they also are limiting the number of drop boxes that are available to one drop box per polling location so that there aren't so many of them that can be perhaps compromised. Great intentions, solid but not spectacular results, in my opinion, in the passage of this bill, Jack. It's still got to go through the House and get to DeWine to be signed. But you got any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a first down, but it's not a touchdown.
There you
And
go.
so
I like that.
you keep possession of the ball and you keep marching down the field. So generally, I think what happens in the state house is that you have a bill in the Senate and a bill in the House, and they're like bills, and you kind of get to see who has an appetite for what part of the bill and for the bill in general, and that's kind of what happened here. So did I hear you correctly? That passed one chamber. It did not pass the overall.
It passed the Senate so far.
Gotcha.
And you know what? I want to apologize. I said 485. I've got two different stories in front of me. One says 485. The other says 458. One of them is right. The other one is wrong. I don't know which. But yes, it passed the Senate.
Yeah, so, and that's okay. I don't think that takes away from the overall point. And the overall point is, I think Senator Gavarone sponsored one, Representative Seitz sponsored another, and they're like going to be like two ships passing in the night, right? And yes, one drop box, and all mail-in ballots have to be postmarked by the day of the election, or excuse me, they have to be received by 7:30 the day of the election. It used to be that they could be received 10 days after.
Up to 10 days,
gone.
yeah.
And the voter ID, that's a plus for me. I think it's a win. I think it's a win, and I think we talked about this earlier. I kind of get really perturbed by people who go, "Oh my gosh, this is going to suppress the vote." And I go, if you get a subpoena to appear in court, you go to court, or you get a bench warrant issued, and your butt's in jail. So don't pretend like people who are even in the thick of it can't get to a place and get something done. If you need to renew or get a driver's license, you go do that. And so I tend to believe like you do. I think it's extremely racist when people who oppose buttoning up our voter integrity laws say, well, it's going to be the blacks, or it's going to be people of low income. Hogwash. I mean, what you're basically doing is you're throwing a blanket over everybody and saying you're stupid, you're irresponsible, and you can't get there to exercise your right to vote. So overall, I like it. Bob, let me throw this in real quick. Today's episode is sponsored by the Freedom Foundation. The Freedom Foundation is the creator of optouttoday.com. That's the #1 tool to free government employees from union bondage. Go to freedomfoundation.com to learn more and to make a 501c3 deductible donation. And when you do donate and you write "talking smack" in the notes, they'll double your contribution. So thank you, Freedom Foundation.
Love it. Thank you so much, Freedom Foundation, for me as well. So good stuff, and I really do hope they do hit the home run. I'm sorry, you doing football. You said first down, not a touchdown. I hope they do get the touchdown, and I think this is a good step in the first direction. But make the voter IDs mandatory, the photo IDs. Make them have to have the correct address on them. And again, if you need to go get that buttoned up, go get it buttoned up. You're capable. If you're an adult, if you're 18 or over and you're eligible to cast a vote, you can find your way to the BMV. And by the way, if you are in the under the poverty level, what am I trying to say? What's the level of standard of poverty? Whatever, you understand my point. You can get it for free. You don't have to worry. You're not going to charge you, because they like to say that's a poll tax. You're making somebody get a new license. It's going to cost them $15 or something. No, it's not. If you are under the poverty level, you can go ahead and get that for free anyway. So summarizing today, Shea resolution with the toll amendment passed. That's good news. The 178 looks like it's still on the brink right now. We'll follow that up, obviously, next time we get together. We'll find out whether or not that passes. And the Senate got something right with respect to elections and solidifying our voting rights. So that's where we stand for now. Jack, good stuff. Thank you, my friend. Thanks to everybody who listens to Talkin' Smack. I'm Bob.
And I'm Jack. Thank you, everybody.
We'll talk to you on episode 11 next time. Share this episode with people you like, because it was good. I could tell I was there. Share this. Grow us. Help us. Let's share more next time. See ya. Bye-bye.